Good morning. This is Mr. Murray. I am coming to you from my home on March 26th at 11:30. So this session is going to be for the eighth grade class. Seventh graders are more than welcome to come in. Madison, how are you? Um, I did something a little different today. I put the notes that I'll be using for this session on Google Classroom. So if you go to Google Classrooms and you pull up the summary for To Kill a Mockingbird Chapter 13, you can go through the notes. Thanks. I thought I'd wear something a little more festive today since I'm stuck inside. So anyways, let's begin. Today we're going to talk about character development. The two characters that this chapter primarily delves into are Aunt Alexandria and Atticus. Up to this point, Aunt Alexandria has kind of been seen as like a stern, not quite mean, but kind of like aloof and uncaring character. And Atticus has just been kind of like a generic good guy who always does the right thing. So this chapter really helps to round both of those characters out. We see some more good qualities and some more bad qualities from Aunt Alexandria. And we also get some self-doubt and other characteristics from Atticus, which kind of round him out as a character, so he doesn't just come off as this generic good guy who just always does the right thing. He becomes more real this chapter, and it helps him make the different sacrifices and events that he takes part in seem more reasonable when you look at his entire character. So anyways, let's start with Aunt Alexandria. Up to this point, pre-chapter 13, Aunt Alexandria has been viewed as kind of like proper conservative. She's overly concerned with her own reputation and the reputation of her family. She's critical of Atticus and how he raises his children, and she doesn't hide that from the kids. So Jem and Scout both are aware of the fact that Aunt Alexandria, maybe it's not that she doesn't like them, but she doesn't approve of the way that they behave. Also, we know that she's in a bad marriage. Her husband and her rarely talk. Her child and her also rarely talk, but she does have a good relationship with her grandson, who she spoils. And that was Cousin Francis, if you remember back a few chapters, the boy that called Atticus a bad word and Scout beat him up for it. And another important thing to note is that while she's a grandparent, she's actually younger than Atticus. Atticus is the oldest, and he only is recently a parent. His son's 12, Jem, and Scout, I think, is 8 at this point. So even though he's older, he's actually still parenting, whereas Aunt Alexandria has moved past that part, and she's more of like a grandparent or a great aunt to Scout and Jem, which kind of like helps explain her kind of aloofness and how she's kind of disconnected with actually raising kids, because she did that so long ago. Atticus, to this point, pre-chapter 13, we know he's an older parent. We know he's a widower. He's been a widower for 10 years at this point, or no, 8 years at this point, because we know Jem was 4 when his wife died. He's educated. He's a lawyer. He's primarily self-educated. Especially in the earlier years, like he was very self-taught. Instead of going to school, he presumably did go to college to become a lawyer. He has a strong sense of honor, duty, and honesty, and that's kind of what drives him. He also has a strong concern for his family's reputation, but unlike Aunt Alexandria, who allows her concern for her reputation to kind of outweigh all other concerns, Atticus always puts his kids first. So if his reputation gets hurt, but it helps his children somehow, he'll do that. If his children's reputation gets hurt, but it helps them in the long run, he'll still do that. So he always puts their well-being first and foremost, and you can kind of see that how he'll sacrifice his own reputation for their betterment or the betterment of just people in general. He's always willing to sacrifice his reputation, which is something Aunt Alexandria will not do, and it kind of contrasts their characters. Atticus also has a very relaxed parenting style. If you remember earlier on when Jem was in the treehouse and refused to come down after Atticus told him to, Atticus just kind of let it go and decided that he'd come down at some point anyways, and if he encouraged or discouraged it, Jem would be more likely to stay up there. So it works, but it's also very different than how Calpurnia would have handled the situation, or Aunt Alexandria would have handled the situation. They both wouldn't have taken no for an answer from a child. Another thing about Atticus is he's very brave. He showed that when he shot the dog that was rabid earlier, and he also shows it by the fact that he's defending an African American during segregation times in the 1930s, knowing that's going to hurt his reputation. Up to this point, he's very well liked by the community, by the wealthier people and the poorer people alike. Everyone kind of holds him in high regard. The Radleys are he's one of the few people the Radleys actually invite to their house to handle legal matters. Miss DeVos, even though she's kind of mean to everybody, she actually does talk to him when he talks civilly to her. And the Cunninghams, the poor family that's very honorable, they also hold him in high esteem. So when he takes this case, he knows he's going to hurt his reputation, but he does it anyway. So that shows some level of bravery. He also accepts all people, so he doesn't seem like he cares what color someone's skin is. He doesn't care how wealthy someone is, how educated someone is. He kind of treats everyone with the same level of respect, even if that person's not treating him with respect. We noticed that with Miss DeVos. She had said some really awful things about Atticus, his dead wife, and his children, and he still treated her with a measure of respect, which demonstrates his character. The only group that we know he doesn't like is the Yules, and we haven't seen that interaction between Mr. Yule and Atticus yet, but Scout did let slip that Atticus said the Yules were trash. And so it doesn't seem like he's discussing that on the matter of they don't have any money. It seems like he's talking about their characteristics, like their sense of duty and honor and all that is trash. So far, they're the only people we've met who Atticus doesn't like. And then the other thing about him would be his just inability to hold a grudge. So someone can say something cruel to him or do something kind of cruel to him, and he'll always let it go. He always seems to value doing the right thing above holding a grudge. So anyway, so that's information pre-chapter 13. Let's get to the actual chapter. All right, so this chapter is kind of exciting because it's primarily about Aunt Alexandria. And to this point, Scout thinks she's just really a boring old woman who cooks well, but is kind of just boring. This chapter, she comes to live with Atticus and the children because she's concerned with the court case going on that he won't be able to adequately care for them. And she also doesn't like the way that he's been raising them to this point anyway. She thinks that Atticus has been too hands off and that they need a mother figure. So Aunt Alexandra's come to take care of this. Now, this demonstrates several positive attributes about her. One, it shows devotion to family. Even though she and Atticus seem like they disagree on a lot of things, he is her brother, and she's trying to do him a favor. This also demonstrates like some genuine care for Scout and Jem. She mentions that they need a mother figure, and she's willing to do that. You can ask any of your parents. I'm sure any of them will tell you that being a parent's a difficult job. So the fact that she's willing to step in and fulfill this role does show a lot of like love and devotion from her. There is a possible negative aspect that a student I had several years ago pulled out. He said that it was possible that she came to help raise the children because she hated her home life so much. We know that she doesn't get along with her husband. Her own son rarely comes to visit. She does have a good relationship with her grandson, but she doesn't see him very often because he lives far away. So it's possible she's taking this opportunity to get away from her husband in a bad marriage. Also, she might be there primarily because she's concerned with the reputation of the family over concern for Jem and Scout and Atticus. So there is that possibility that it isn't a completely altruistic or good thing she's doing just for the sake of doing a good thing, but it's possible she's doing this for more selfish reasons, like maintaining her own family's reputation. Good morning, Ms. Yingling. I saw that you hopped aboard too. We're discussing chapter 13 of To Kill a Mockingbird. I mentioned when I first got on, if anyone wants to go to Google Classroom, they can see the lecture notes from there and kind of follow along, or you can check it out later, or you can just listen to me rambling on. Anyways, so The big interaction at the beginning of the chapter is Scout talking to her aunt. The aunt does seem like she's trying to connect with Scout here. Aunt Alexandria asks her what she's been up to, if she has any friends. She just goes through kind of a laundry list of real quick questions. And any student watching or Miss Yingling, since she's a parent, can probably relate to this scene where the aunt says, well, what have you done today? And Scout's reply is, nothing. Then she's like, well, did you hang out with friends today? What did you do? And Scout's replies, nothing. So it's kind of like that like timeless interaction between adults and young people where the adult will give like a prompt and the kid's reply is almost always nothing, right? So it kind of just shows how in some ways like those interactions have never changed. So Scout comes away from this exchange thinking that her aunt's disappointed in her. The aunt probably steps away thinking that Scout's disappointed in her, even though we get this from Scout's perspective. Scout does, after this, kind of observe her aunt. So even though the aunt's not talking to Scout after this, Scout's intently paying attention to how her aunt behaves. I think young people do this a lot and know more than sometimes we think they do. But Scout picks up on that her aunt is very proper. She sees her as very self-assured, which she actually respects about her aunt. She thinks that her aunt would never even think that she couldn't do something if she was faced with some sort of a difficult situation. She just assumes that she's so self-confident that she could kind of do whatever she wanted. She sees her as being very strong, not necessarily pretty, but she can tell that when she was younger, she was most likely very pretty. She does see some negative aspects in her aunt, though. She thinks that she's nosy and a gossip. She sees the aunt hosting dinner parties throughout this chapter. And even though it looks like she's well liked by the other people in town, she does gossip a lot and she says a lot of negative things behind other people's backs. So Scout sees this and Scout doesn't like that. But she does like that her aunt is very self-assured. And that's something that Scout shares with her, like one of those attributes they have in common. And it's something that could probably build upon later on, but right now, Scout's still kind of holding her aunt at a distance. Scout also pays attention when her aunt talks about families in the town. We had talked earlier in the year about how in small towns, a lot of times people go by their last name, like you're a Smith, you're a Murray, you're a Stark, you're whatever. And that kind of like colors how the people in that town view people with that last name. So we've seen that to some extent within the book. We know the Yules are considered to be very low class and dishonorable. We know the Cunninghams are seen to be very honorable, albeit poor. And now we're seeing how the Finches, that Scout, Jem, Atticus, their family, how their family is viewed by the town versus how Aunt Alexandria wants them to be viewed by the town, right? So Aunt Alexandria thinks that their families got gentle breeding, meaning they were descendants of very wealthy people, very educated people, and they should be held in high esteem. So they need to behave in a way that causes people to hold them in high esteem. Now, from today's standpoint, we would assume that what Atticus is doing, trying to defend someone that no one else will defend, trying to go against racism, is a very good and noble thing. In the context of this time period, Aunt Alexandria sees that as damaging their family's reputation because everyone in town just assumes that he should just go through the motions, allow this Black person to be convicted, and then move on with their lives. Atticus is refusing to do that. So even though nowadays we would say he's doing a very good thing, Aunt Alexandria thinks he's damaging their family's reputation. So she's not happy with that. She's also embarrassed that Scout doesn't know a lot about their family. Scout comes into a dinner party wearing overalls. She's very dirty from playing outside. Everyone in the dinner party are well-dressed older women, and Aunt Alexandria kind of calls her over to talk without seeing how she's dressed and how dirty she is. So she's disappointed in that. And then she's also disappointed when she asks Scout a question about a cousin that Scout has no idea who that person is or that that person was a cousin. Jem tries to salvage the situation by mentioning that he is aware of one of his cousins, a cousin Joshua, who in the past had tried to shoot a president and had ended up costing the family $500, and he was in jail for a while. So it's kind of like a funny story that Jem tells in front of all these people, and that just makes Aunt Alexandria extremely upset because, again, she's trying to elevate their family's reputation in front of all these people, and Jem just kind of like brings up a joke, right? So like this character from their family who's kind of a disappointment that she doesn't want to hear anything about. So that brings us to our first conflict. So Atticus and Alexandria have a discussion about family values. Now, we're not privy to the conversation, but we know it's happening. Scout knows what's going on and tries to leave the room, but she still is aware of basically what happens because of Atticus' his discussion with her afterwards. So Atticus comes to Jem and Scout's room. He decides he wants to talk to them about what it means to be a Finch, and he wants to instill some values about how important their family lineage is to them. Now, as this is going on, Jem and Scout are both confused because Atticus has never talked like this to them before. When Scout's not paying attention and kind of playing with a comb, he gets upset with her and snaps, which is something he just doesn't normally do. So she cries. Jem seems really confused. He asks a few questions, then just kind of stares off into space. With his daughter crying and his son kind of not paying any attention whatsoever to him, he kind of snaps back to his regular personality and realizes that this isn't something he really cares about anyways. So he tells them just to forget everything he said, right? So we had talked to them about how they needed to behave a certain way, how they had to be more respectable, kind of echoing Aunt Alexandria's views on how to act ladylike or how to act like a gentleman in Jem's case. And since it's so alien to what they're used to, they're both kind of shocked. And these are also values that Atticus normally doesn't hold super high. He does care about his family's reputation, but that's not like his defining characteristic, whereas that is for Aunt Alexandria. So he just leaves the two kids really confused. He does try to reverse this. He says that just to ignore everything he said, it was a mistake. He also tries to tell a dad joke about their cousin Joshua, the one who tried to shoot the president years and years ago, which is kind of funny, but the kids don't get it. The important thing here is, though, that Scout realizes that what he's doing isn't coming from him, right? Like, she realizes that Aunt Alexandria put him up to this. So even though he's the older of the two, he's demonstrating some self-doubt here. So up to this point, he's always seemed very self-assured. Even when he's doing something that no one else agrees with, he never seems to experience any self-doubt. But here in his parenting, we're seeing that he really does have a lot of self-doubt. Like, he's concerned from his discussion with Aunt Alexandria whether or not he's raising his children the right way, whether or not maybe he has neglected an aspect of parenting that he should have instilled in them. So he tries to do that. When they cry, he decides that he was wrong. And this further illustrates like that hierarchy of desires, right? So like his main desire is to care for his children, make sure they grow up to be good people. Aunt Alexandria values family reputation higher. He starts to go that way too, but then once he sees the impact it has on his children, he reverts back to his normal self. Scout mentions to Atticus before he leaves that she can hear his stomach growling during this conversation. I think that's the author trying to hint that he's nervous. Like, sometimes your stomach will growl when you're nervous. So normally he seems very self-assured when he talks to the kids. Here he seems kind of nervous. He tells that like really bad dad joke at the end of the conversation, and he tells them just to forget everything he said. So it demonstrates that even though he is constantly coming across as this heroic good guy, he is filled with some self-doubt, and he does have some character flaws within himself. So the chapter ends. We know that up to this point, Atticus has been completely in control, wise, self-assured, but here he demonstrates frustration, self-doubt. He also tells that really bad dad joke, which doesn't land and confuses the kids even more, which again kind of shows like some character flaws. And Alexandria shows that her strengths and weaknesses kind of coincide, right? So she has devotion to her family, which is a really good quality, but it's more of like a big picture type situation. So she cares about the family as in the entire family, not the individual members of that family. It would be kind of like if a teacher like said they cared about their classroom, but they didn't take the time to help one student who was failing, right? They care about the classroom as a whole, not just that one person. So like Aunt Alexandria kind of does that. Like she realizes that Scout and Jem are part of the family, but she cares about the entire family more than the individual components of it. Um, that contrasts with Atticus, who seems like he's way more concerned with individuals, right? So he does take into account people's families when he's interacting with them, but especially the Cunninghams, when he had the young Cunningham boy over for lunch and he was talking to him about farming. So he demonstrated that he understood where he was coming from and he treated them with respect. But Atticus like focuses more in on people as individuals than as groups. Aunt Alexandria's other main strength is that she's very self-confident. Now, this chapter introduces that, and even though she doesn't have a ton of interactions with Scout in this chapter, that still kind of shines through, and Scout sees that as a very good quality, something to emulate later on. This self-confidence is also a weakness, though, for Aunt Alexandria because it causes her not to question herself. Whereas Atticus, he's been parenting his children alone for the past 8 years with some help from California. When Aunt Alexandria suggests that maybe he's failing them in some way, he actually examines that. And then he tries to change his parenting style, decides it's not for him or his kids, but he does have that ability to like change his mind, whereas Aunt Alexandria just doesn't have that. Once she's made up her mind on something, she's going to follow through with it. So that can be a good thing, self-confidence, but then it can also kind of border in on stubbornness, which can lead to problems. So that demonstrates good and bad things about her. I know up to this point, her relationship with Scout's not very good, and it's easy to kind of write her off as a negative character and Atticus as this great heroic type character. But as the book goes on, we see more about Aunt Alexandria, and Scout's view of her is going to change somewhat. And because the story's coming from her perspective, it kind of we need to be careful to be kind of objective with judging her yet, because she does end up not being a wholly negative character, which is, I think, the author's point for the entire book. If you remember, every character that's been introduced has been very round and has good and negative things about them. Really, the only characters we haven't gotten something positive about are the Yules, and we've only really met the one young boy, so we can't really like judge the whole family yet, other than just by what Atticus and Scout have kind of said from gossip. The last important thing for this chapter is to go back to that idea about hierarchy in town. Aunt Alexandria explains to some extent to Scout and some extent through her interactions with the other women at the dinner party what the town hierarchy is, right? So the idea that people in town are very prestigious. Some people in town are less honorable, like the ones that tend to be poor, and she kind of goes down this list. Scout hears her saying that, how the Crawfords are all gossips, how I forget the name, but there's one family that are all kind of flighty and frivolous and they're not serious. She goes through this laundry list. Scout hears it, but she disagrees with it. Scout decides that the Aunt Alexandria has this whole hierarchy system completely wrong, this whole caste system about who's on top, who's on bottom. And she views it as thus. She says that everyone's been in town basically unchanged for generations. So the people who were here during the Civil War, their descendants are here now. So it's the 1930s when the story's taking place. The Civil War takes place in the 1860s. So you have this huge gap of time where parents have had children and so on and so on. So that's why Scout thinks that the people who are in town have come to view certain families as having certain characteristics. But Scout doesn't quite hold to that notion. She thinks what's going on is these people have been here for so long that they can anticipate what each other are going to do in certain situations, and that's what causes that. Now, she does see how some people are treated better than other people in town. She sees it as being currently the people who are popular are up top, the people who are poor are like pushing towards the middle, and then the people who are poor and are dishonorable are at the bottom. She's missing something here, though, that we talked about earlier, how the Yules being viewed as completely dishonorable and poor. Scout would put them at the bottom. The townspeople as a whole are, because again, segregation, they're putting African Americans below them. And that's being demonstrated by the fact that one of the Yules, who has a horrible reputation, his words being taken above Tom Robinson, who has a pretty solid reputation, but because he's black, Yule's accusation is still being considered to be valid, even though everyone kind of acknowledges that he's not a trustworthy person. So that kind of wraps up this chapter. The important things in this chapter, again, are character development, primarily with in Alexandria and Atticus. The other important thing in this chapter is kind of the caste system in Macomb County, and that will come out more obvious during the trial as Scout learns more about Tom Robinson and how people who have interacted him view him versus how the Yules behave and how they act, and how she finds this caste system to be extremely unfair. We also will get a little bit more on Aunt Alexandria and how her positive and negative qualities kind of just blend together. Next chapter, she's going to have some things to say about Calpurnia, which can come across both negative and positive depending on how you're viewing it. All right, so that basically wraps it up. It's 11:58 according to my watch, and I'll just give you the last 2 minutes of class to clean up, pack your pencils and computers and all that. So have a good day, and I'll be back on in about an hour. Thanks. Bye.